Hey, what's up and welcome to my channel. My name is Johannes and today I want to talk to you about social media. This is a topic that I thought a lot about recently because I noticed that I spend a lot more time, especially on Instagram. And I know I'm not alone with that. A lot of people spend more time on social media, whether that's Instagram or TikTok or any other of those services, than they would like to. So I decided to make a video about it and talk about social media. How do these companies make money? What is their business model? And why is this problematic for us as individuals, but also for society as a whole? Before we can look at the problems associated with social media, we first have to understand how it works. How do these companies make money and what is their business model? The attention economy. All major social networks, whether that's YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, are free to use. How is that possible? The reason that we don't have to pay for these services is simply that we are not their customers. The real customers of social media companies are the advertisers who can use these platforms to show their ads to us and to advertise their products and services to us. So we are, or more specifically, our attention is the product that is being sold. The more users a social media platform has and the more time these people spend on those platforms, the more money the company will make, because more ad space can be sold to advertisers. So if theoretically everybody decided to spend half as much time on social media, the revenue of these companies would drop by 50% because they can only show half as many ads. So the way the business model works creates a strong incentive for social media companies to get us to spend as much time as possible on their platforms. Their goal is to have us check our phones as many times as possible and to capture as much of our attention as possible. We like to think of social media as a tool or as an innocent source of entertainment, but in reality, it is a very powerful algorithm that is pointed at our brains with the goal to capture as much of our attention as possible. Companies like Facebook literally spend millions of dollars to hire psychologists and attention engineers to make their products more addictive. Some of these people even worked at casinos before, where their job was to design, for example, slot machines. And social media sites actually use a lot of the same mechanisms as slot machines do. For example, when you swipe down to refresh your newsfeed, you never know what you will get. Maybe you will see an interesting post, maybe not. Maybe you will get a notification that you have new followers or new likes. So this is called intermittent rewards, because you never know if there will be a reward, so you try again and again, and it's incredibly addictive. But still you might say, okay, so what's the big deal? I really like social media, I think it's great that these tools are free to use, and I'm willing to give my attention to these companies in exchange for a great free service. But social media is not as harmless as it might seem. The consequences. The true cost of social media can broadly be categorized into individual costs and societal costs. Let's look at each of those in turn. Individual. We already explored that social media is all about attention, but what does that mean for us and for our lives? When it comes down to it, our experience of life comes down to just that, to our experiences. And what we experience is determined to a large part, or maybe even exclusively, by what we pay attention to. I would argue that experiences in the real world, like going for a hike, talking to another human, or building something with our hands, are a lot more meaningful than any experience we can have on social media. Which is not to say that social media can't have a place in our lives. But I think its place should be primarily that of a facilitator of real-life experiences. For example, you might use social media to connect with like-minded people online and then meet up in real life. Or you could use it to search for inspiration for your offline creative work. My hope is that by watching this video, you learn something, you look at things from a new perspective, and that you can apply these things to your life offline. So social media can be a very powerful and a very useful tool, but it's very difficult to just use it as a tool because it's engineered in a way to capture as much of our attention as possible. I often find myself using social media in a way that does not at all enhance or facilitate real-life experiences, but that replaces them. So it's really important that we are very intentional about the way we interact with these tools. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Another issue is that our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. We seem to have lost our ability to sit still and focus on one thing for an extended period of time, which is a big problem because many of the best and most important things in life require focused attention. long conversations with our loved ones, good books, creative pursuits, appreciating art, enjoying nature. All these things require that we pay close attention to our experience without distraction. And our real-life experiences get diminished when we aren't able to keep our attention on them. Of course, this also affects our relationships, which is kind of ironic because social media was intended as a tool that brings us closer together. And in some cases, it has done that. As I said, I think social media can be a useful tool sometimes when used intentionally. But more often than not, social media replaces our real-life relationships with digital interactions. So we are at the same time more connected and more lonely. More connected because we can keep in touch with and connect with millions of people all around the world. More lonely because what we really need aren't thousands of superficial online interactions, but a handful of deep personal connections. Have you ever noticed that there is a lot of white space in human eyes, while in other animals the iris tends to fill up most of the eyes? That's so we can see where somebody is looking. We evolved to pick up on even the most subtle cues, such as facial expressions, intonation, body language, and even scent. Digital interactions can't replace that, but this level of deep personal connection is essential to being human. We need to experience each other with all of our senses. Seeing someone through a screen, let alone sharing text messages, just can't replace actually seeing and hearing and touching someone. Our inability to focus also has implications for our productivity. Cal Newport writes that if we want to become successful, whether that's as an employee, as an entrepreneur, or as an artist, we need to create something that is rare and valuable. And making something that's rare and valuable always takes focused attention. Would Einstein have come up with his theory of relativity if he had spent 3 hours a day on TikTok? Would Homer have been able to write the Odyssey if he had been distracted by social media? Every great achievement in the history of humanity was the result of long periods of focused attention. Another way to think about this is that we are losing our ability to be bored. We tend to think of boredom as something negative, but actually it's essential for us. When we sit around doing nothing, boredom will drive us to do something. To work on a project, to pick up a book, to talk to a friend, to go for a walk. Boredom drives us to do things that are good for us. It drives us to be our best. Now we have technologies that allow us to get rid of boredom as soon as it arrives. This effectively short-circuits our ability to be bored, and it robs us of all the benefits of boredom. All of the things we would be driven to do if we couldn't escape boredom this easily. Losing our ability to focus is a huge problem, but it gets even worse. Social media can have a devastating effect on our mental health. For example, social media is associated with increased rates in depression, anxiety, and loneliness. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is that social media allows us to compare ourselves with everyone else all the time. We used to try to keep up only with the Joneses next door. Now we can compare ourselves with everyone around the world. This can make us feel inadequate, not good enough, because we can't keep up with what we see online. Another is that social media has been shown to affect our sleep negatively, which also affects our mental health. And especially among teenagers, cyberbullying has become an important factor that affects their mental health. There are all kinds of studies now that show this connection between social media and poor mental health. There's one study, for example, that showed that students who use their phone more than 2 hours per day rate their mental health worse than less frequent users. An American study showed a 37% increase in the likelihood of major depressive episodes in adolescence. Another especially concerning statistic indicates that after 2009, when social media use really started to take off, there was a 25% increase in teenage suicide attempts. Especially teenage girls who spent more than 2 hours a day on social media were affected by this. A lot of influential managers in social media companies are known for not using social media and for not allowing their kids to use it. If the creators of these products don't use them and don't let their kids use them, then we really have to question if they are as safe as we tend to think they are. Societal. We already explored a number of ways in which social media can be problematic for us as individuals. But of course, all of these problems can also become societal problems. When a large part of the population suffers from mental health problems, is not able to focus on one thing for an extended period of time, or when the social fabric of our communities gets weakened, that's a problem for all of us as a society. But there is another way in which social media can be very dangerous for society. It might be even more dangerous than all of the things we talked about until now. This has to do with something called the negativity bias. This is a psychological phenomenon that describes that we tend to pay more attention to negative information. And of course, there are good evolutionary reasons for this. Imagine for a moment that you are a prehistoric human and a friend of you tells you, the weather today is very pleasant and there is a saber-toothed tiger in the bush next to the village. Now, if our ancestors hadn't paid way more attention to the second piece of information in the statement, we wouldn't be here today. And our brains still work like this. When we hear good news, we might be delighted about it, but it doesn't register as something that's really important. But when we hear bad news, on the other hand, we can't look away and it captures our attention completely. Because after all, hearing about it might save us from a dangerous and potentially life-threatening situation. And there is another psychological bias that is at play here. It's called the confirmation bias. This means that we tend to pay more attention to information if it confirms our existing beliefs and opinions. You probably remember what we talked about earlier, how the goal of social media companies is to capture as much of our attention as possible and to keep us using their products for as long as possible. And how they use powerful algorithms that are programmed to show us whatever content will keep us on the platform the longest. So putting one and one together, you can probably see where this is going. What kind of content will the algorithm show us? A news article that presents the facts as objectively and neutrally as possible, or an article that is one-sided, uses emotional language, and is designed to produce outrage? And the result of this is incredibly dangerous. Tristan Harris, a former Google employee who made it his mission to create more awareness for the dangers of the attention economy, explains that often the algorithm will show us content that is slightly more extreme than our current position because that's what will get our attention. As we get used to this, our position slowly shifts and the algorithm will show us more and more extreme content. Often this content is designed to produce outrage and has an us versus them mentality. And in that way, people are nudged towards more and more extreme political positions. This has created a political climate of extreme polarization. Of course, social media is not the only driver of political polarization, but it has been a major force in intensifying it. Today, we as a society face many problems that require all of us to work together. But this is becoming increasingly difficult. For example, how are we going to fight climate change if a big part of the population denies that it even exists? Same with COVID or the war in Ukraine. This extreme polarization makes it incredibly difficult to find agreements on these important issues, and social media plays a big role in creating this form of tribalism. What's really terrifying is that people are becoming more and more radical over time, which in some cases can even lead to offline violence. In 2017 in Myanmar, fake news and hate speech were spread about the Rohingya, a Muslim minority group, and this ultimately contributed to thousands of Rohingya being killed. Agnes Kalamar, Amnesty International Secretary General, said, "In 2017, the Rohingya were killed, tortured, raped, and displaced in the thousands as part of the Myanmar Security Forces campaign of ethnic cleansing. In the months and years leading up to the atrocities, Facebook's algorithms were intensifying a storm of hatred against the Rohingya, which contributed to real-world violence." And Facebook publicly acknowledged that they did play a role in these events. Of course, they didn't do it on purpose, but it is a result of their business model. Mark Zuckerberg used to say that Facebook's motto is to move fast and break things. When we look at the many ways in which Facebook did break things, from our attention to actual human lives, this statement takes on a new, very sinister meaning. And it leads us to ask, where does this leave us and what can we do about this? How should we respond to this crisis? How to become a digital minimalist? There is definitely an urgent need for governments to act and also for social media companies to come up with a new business model that doesn't have all these negative side effects. But in this video, I want to focus on the things that we as individuals can do. So what can we do? How can we avoid the devastating effects that social media has on our attention, on our mental health, and on our relationships? We could just delete our social media accounts and avoid it completely, and that is certainly a completely legitimate and effective way to deal with the problem. But for many of us, it might not be the right solution. And you might, for example, still wish to use social media as a tool intentionally on occasion. So I'm going to propose a technique that Cal Newport explains in his book Digital Minimalism. and it's called the digital declutter. Just as in traditional decluttering, we look at each of these technologies and make an intentional decision whether or not we want to keep them in our lives and how we are going to use them going forward. Step 1. Create rules. Look at all the technologies you use and then define which of them are optional and which aren't. There may be some technologies that you are required to use for work, or maybe you want to use a messaging service that you need when you pick your kids up from school. Just write all of this down and then come up with rules for the services that you want to keep using. Maybe you need to use Instagram to promote your online shop. In that case, you could define a specific time window in which you can use Instagram, and also define that you can use Instagram only to post content and not to look at your feed. Step 2, take a 30-day break. Now for 30 days, stop using all optional technologies and use all other technology only according to the rules you created in the first step. Step 3, replace digital habits with quality leisure. For most people, digital activities take up a significant amount of time every day. So when you just remove them, there is going to be a vacuum. Be very intentional about how you fill this time and use it in a way that is positive for you. Cal Newport calls this quality leisure, and he gives a few recommendations on how we can identify good ways to spend our free time. Quality leisure are activities that are analog, social, creative, and challenging. Step 4. Reflect on your values. Also use this time as an opportunity to think about your values. What is important to you? Family, creativity, health? Reflect on this question throughout these 30 days. And also consider how social media fits into this. Does it promote your values, or does it keep you from living in alignment with them? And even if a technology in some way promotes your values, is it really the best way to do it? For example, looking at inspiring images on Instagram might in some way contribute to your value of creating art, but it might be even better to use this time instead to go to an art gallery or a museum or to create art. Step 5. Reintroduce technology. After the 30 days are over, you can decide which of these services you want to bring back into your life, and then define strict guidelines for them. There are going to be some technologies that you are not going to want to bring back into your life. But for those that you decide to reintroduce, it's important to create guidelines for how you are going to use them going forward. For example, you might want to bring back Instagram to stay up to date with design trends by following a handful of influential designers. So you might define a guideline that says that you can only follow 10 influential designers and only look at their posts in a defined 30-minute window once per week. You could also delete your app from the phone and only do this in the desktop version. And in that way, you get all the benefits from the service that are related to your goals and your values without bringing back any of the negative side effects. I'm going to start a digital declutter right now and delete my social media apps for 30 days. Join me if you want, and let me know in the comments below if you also want to do a digital declutter. We covered a lot today. I hope you found it interesting. Like this video if you did. Subscribe if you are new to the channel and want to see more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I would see you if you want in my next video.